What do you mean my account is overdrawn? I stared at my phone, feigning surprise as Brandon's sister ranted about the rent money he had promised her. He did what? I kept my voice even, letting her believe I was just learning about my husband's betrayal. My name is Thompson, and my husband, Brandon, just became the worst mistake of my life, but not in the way he thinks. That Sunday morning, when I woke up to an empty bed and a cruel note stuck to the fridge, it felt like a slap in the face, even though I'd seen it coming. Goodbye, never loved you anyway. Real classy, Brandon. I'm a forensic accountant in Milwaukee, and for the past 15 years, I've tracked financial fraud for some of the biggest corporations in the Midwest. So when my own husband started laying the groundwork for his great escape 3 months ago, he wasn't exactly dealing with an amateur. The red flags had been Thary's sudden interest in our finances after years of apathy, secret phone calls, unexplained absences, the way his laptop screen would flicker to something else the second I walked into the room. Classic. What he never realized was that I saw everything, every shady transaction, every hidden expense, every pathetic attempt to siphon money from our accounts. I documented it all. Screenshots, statements, paper trails leading straight to my lawyer. By the time he left that smug little note, convinced he had outsmarted me, our savings were already moved, our accounts flagged, his so-called escape plan, dead on arrival. So when the fraud alert started rolling in that Monday morning, I couldn't help but smile. Brandon thought he was 10 steps ahead. He had no idea he was walking straight into a trap. My phone buzzed with notifications, declined transactions, frozen accounts, failed withdrawals. Each one was music to my ears. I brushed my fingers over the folder labeled "just in case" sitting on my desk, packed with months of evidence. This wasn't just about stopping him. It was about destroying every path forward. As his sister's panicked voice rattled through the phone, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You might think I'd be devastated, learning my husband of 8 years never really loved me. But here's the thing about being a forensic accountant: you learn to recognize patterns. People think they're clever when they hide things. But money always leaves a trail. And Brandon, he left breadcrumbs everywhere. We met at a charity gala 6 years ago. He was charming, successful, or so he claimed, an investment advisor with a sharp suit, a smooth smile, and grand plans for the future. I should have noticed the inconsistencies, how he dodged questions about his clients, how vague he was about his past. The first few years were good, at least. I thought they were. We bought a house in the suburbs, took extravagant vacations, talked about starting a family. But then there were the little things: tension in his voice when I mentioned meeting his old colleagues, the way he snapped whenever I brought up his student loans. You don't trust me, he'd say, flipping the script. Why do you mean to know everything? Classic manipulation. I've seen it countless times in my work, people using emotion to sidestep financial scrutiny. And I let it slide because I wanted to believe in us, in them. That was my first mistake. The second, ignoring the signs when they became impossible to deny. Last Christmas, he insisted on separate accounts for holiday spending. It'll be more romantic if we surprise each other, he said. But the credit card statements, he thought he'd hidden totally different story: purchases from high-end jewelry stores, jewelry I never received. Then there were the weekend business trips that didn't line up with any known conferences, the late-night calls that went straight to voicemail when I was around. Most wives might have confronted their husbands right then and there. But I'm not most wives. Instead, I did what I do best: I followed the money. I tracked every withdrawal, every deposit, every discrepancy. Every time he thought he was covering his tracks, he was actually giving me more ammunition. He had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead. Then, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. I was working late, actually late this time, when my colleague Susan rushed over, her face pale. She clutched her phone like it might burn her. "Ela, you need to see this." I took the phone, and there it was. Brandon's name, linked to a string of suspicious transactions. Not as a witness, not as a victim, As a person of interest, my stomach turned to ice. The same patterns I'd been tracking in our personal accounts were showing up in his professional dealings. Brandon wasn't just running from me. He was running from something much bigger. Susan swallowed hard. "There's more," she whispered, scrolling through the documents. And in that moment, I knew Brandon didn't just betray me. He had no idea just how much trouble he was really in. He's been named in 3 other fraud investigations, different states, different names, same M.O. Brandon found successful women, married them, and then vanished with their money. The last one was in Phoenix just before he moved to Milwaukee. The pieces snapped into place: the charm, the secrecy, the sudden interest in our finances. It wasn't love, it was a setup. I wasn't his wife. I was his next mark. And he had no idea that this time, he'd chosen the wrong woman to con. That night, I sat in our kitchen until dawn, revisiting every moment's loving husband act, the subtle manipulation, the way he slowly tried to isolate me from my friends and family. It was all so obvious now. I laughed, not because it was funny, because of the sheer, bitter irony. He thought he was in control. But he was playing a game I had already won. For the next 3 weeks, I played my role to perfection. Every morning, I kissed him goodbye like nothing was wrong. Every night, I listened to his lies about work while documenting every shady transaction. I moved our savings, contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, built a case that wouldn't just protect me but would take him down for good. One evening, he studied me across the dinner table. "You seem different lately," he said carefully. "Is everything okay?" I smiled, thinking about the trap I had laid. "Just tired from work," I said. "You know how it gets this time of year." He nodded, probably imagining I was working hard to make more money for him to steal. If he had been paying closer attention, he might have noticed a gleam in my eye. But con men like Brandon never think they'll be the ones getting played. The setup: the morning after Brandon disappeared, everything unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. First, a call from the bank, multiple failed withdrawals, credit cards maxed out. Next, his sister panicked about the money he had promised her. Then, a woman named Rachel Clark from Phoenix. "Do you know where my husband is?" she asked. Her husband? The words sent a chill down my spine. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I asked, gripping the phone. "Brandon Murphy," Rachel said tightly. "He's still legally my husband. He disappeared with my savings 3 years ago. I've been tracking him ever since." I exhaled, a slow, satisfied smile forming. "Actually, here, he went by Brandon Thompson, and you're not going to believe this, but I've been expecting your call." For the next hour, Rachel and I compared notes. Same story, same lies, same pattern of draining accounts before vanishing. But this time, there was one difference. Me. "I have enough evidence to put him away," I told her, "but I need your help to make sure he doesn't slip away again." My phone buzzed, a text from Brandon. "I'm sorry, can we talk, just one last time?" "Perfect." I turned to my lawyer, who was already preparing our counterattack. She glanced at the message, then at me. "Let's set the trap." The fall, I met Brandon at a coffee shop downtown. He was already there, looking appropriately disheveled, red-rimmed eyes, rumpled clothes, the perfect picture of a man who had made a terrible mistake. "Ela, I'm so sorry," he began, reaching for my hand. "I've been going through some things, dealing with some bad investments. I just panicked." I pulled my hand back, keeping my expression carefully neutral. "How much trouble are you in, Brandon?" His eyes flickered just for a second, but I caught it. He thought I was falling for it. "About $200, 000, he admitted, "but I have a plan. I just need access to our emergency fund." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. "Oh, you mean the emergency fund you tried to empty yesterday?" His face fought a red just for a moment before he recovered. "That was a mistake," he insisted. "I wasn't thinking clearly, but if you help me now, I promise." "What?" That you won't disappear again, like you did to Rachel in Phoenix. The color drained from his face. For the first time since I had met him, Brandon Murphy Thompson, or whatever his real name was, looked genuinely afraid. I slid a folder across the table. You know, if you'd done your research, you might have realized that stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't your smartest move. That's when two FBI agents approached. Brandon barely had time to react before they hauled him to his feet. I stood, adjusting my jacket. Oh, and Brandon, I smirked, you might want to call a lawyer, a good one. As he was led away in handcuffs, my phone buzzed again. Susan. Her timing couldn't have been better. I answered, stepping outside into the crisp morning air. We got him, she said, triumphant. The team just finished analyzing those offshore accounts you flagged. Brandon wasn't just running a marriage, he was running a massive Ponzi scheme. I let out a breath. How bad? We're looking at fraud in The Reckoning. I watched through the coffee shop window as Brandon was placed into a federal vehicle. He looked smaller now, nothing like the confident man who thought he'd outsmarted me. How many victims? I asked, already bracing myself for the answer. 23 so far, Susan replied, spanning 5 states, 12 marriages owed to successful women in finance. I exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of it settle in. But here's the kicker, she added. We found evidence of a new investment firm he was setting up. He was planning to use your credentials and reputation to lure in high-net-worth clients. I thought back to all those late nights when he'd asked about my cases, his sudden interest in my work. He wasn't being supportive. He was gathering information. He was planning to exploit my professional reputation for his biggest scheme yet. The irony, I said, shaking my head, if he hadn't gotten greedy, if he'd just stuck to his usual marriage scam, might have gotten away with it again. But he had to go bigger. Susan smirked. That's not even the best part. Remember the country club membership he insisted on last year? I frowned. Yeah. Turns out, he was using it to meet his next target, Caroline Mitchell, the hedge fund manager. He was already laying the groundwork for his next disappearing act. I recalled all the Sunday golf games, the late-night networking events. While he was playing the devoted husband at home, he was setting up his next victim. But Caroline Mitchell wasn't just any hedge fund manager. She was one of my closest friends, and she'd been working with me for months to document Brandon's every move. I grinned. Let me guess, Caroline gave you access to all their private conversations. Susan laughed. Every email, every text, every recorded conversation in the club lounge. He literally handed us a blueprint of his entire operation while trying to seduce her. Brandon had spent months meticulously planning his exit, convinced he was the smartest person in the room. Meanwhile, everyone he thought he was manipulating had been working together, building an airtight case against him. I shook my head. Have you heard from his sister, Kelly? Susan's expression darkened. That's another interesting thread. Turns out she's not his sister at all. I stared at her. What? She's an accomplice. They've been running this scam together for years. She plays the desperate sister to explain why he needs to borrow money urgently right before he disappears. My stomach turned. Where is she now? Being picked up in Chicago as we speak. I Saturday back, taking it all in. The scope of Brandon's deception was breathtaking. But so was his blindness. He'd been so focused on maintaining his lies that he never noticed the trap closing around him. One more thing, Susan added. We found his real identity. His name isn't Brandon Thompson or Murphy. It's Brandon Roberts, and he's been wanted for fraud in Canada since 2015. I smiled, thinking about the massive case file waiting on my desk. Well, Brandon Roberts, welcome to your worst nightmare. The threat. I was about to head back to the office when my phone buzzed again. I text. Unknown number, you think you're clever, but you have no idea what's coming. My pulse quickened. Then another message. Check your email. I opened my inbox and frowned. See. Attached were detailed photos of me with my family, my daily routines, shots taken through my home windows. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear. From anger. Brandon had hired someone to watch me. I forwarded everything to Susan and my lawyer, then immediately called the FBI agent in charge of Brandon's case. Agent Morrison, we've got another player in the game. Already on it, she said. The photos were sent from an IP address we've been monitoring. James Foster, Brandon's former cellmate from a brief stint in Phoenix. He's been working as Brandon's muscle, threatening victims who get too close to exposing the scheme. I thought about Rachel Clark. Is this why she waited so long to come forward? Probably, Morrison replied grimly. Where is he now? There was a pause. 10. That's the thing. We can locate him, but he's probably. She stopped mid-sentence. Hold on. There's movement on one of Brandon's Thompson accounts. Someone's trying to access it from inside your house. The break-in. My house. Where I'd left my laptop open. I grabbed my phone and called Rachel. She picked up instantly. Is everything okay? I asked. There was a pause, then a whisper. We have a situation. I stood still. Rachel, what's happening? Callie's here. She must have had a key. She's trying to access Brandon's accounts from your computer. My blood ran cold. Callie, the fake sister, the one who was supposed to be in custody. Which meant, Rachel, get out of there. Now, Callie's not working alone. A crash. Rachel gasped. 10. Too late. Foster's here too. My heart pounded, but my mind remained clear. This was exactly the kind of desperate move I'd anticipated. I took a breath. Rachel, remember what we discussed. It's time. Through the phone, I heard her voice steady. Hey, Callie, Rachel said. Before you do anything stupid, you might want to look at what's on that screen. I smiled. I knew exactly what they were seeing. Every file, every account, every piece of evidence. It wasn't just stored on my laptop. It was being live-streamed to the FBI servers, and the entire house, under surveillance. Agents stationed nearby. It was over. Then, Rachel's calm voice came through the phone. Look! The last con. Outside, the wail of sirens filled the air as FBI agents swarmed my house. Within minutes, both Callie and Foster were in custody. Rachel was safe. I drove home to find Agent Morrison waiting for me. Quite a performance, she said, arms crossed. You knew they'd try something like this. I nodded. People like Brandon, Callie, and Foster, they always get desperate at the end. They're so used to being in control that they can't handle losing it. I glanced at my house, now an active crime scene. I just had to make them think they had one last chance to win. Morrison smirked. Well, with this attempted break-in and the threats, we can't add witness intimidation and conspiracy charges to their list. She patted the case file in her hands. I'd say your trap worked perfectly. I thought about Brandon sitting in his cell, probably still convinced he could talk his way out of this. He had no idea his desperate final move had just sealed his fate. The verdict? 2 months later, a Saturday in the courtroom, watching Brandon's world crumble. Gone was the confident smirk. In his placid look of pure, unfiltered panic. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom. Brandon Roberts, for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. His eyes met mine as they led him away. For a brief second, his mask slipped completely. This was the same man who once swore never loved you anyway on a note in my fridge. Now, love was the least of his concerns. Callie and Foster didn't fare much better. Both took plea deals, but they'd still serve significant time, and in exchange for lighter sentences, they provided evidence that blew Brandon's entire operation wide open, exposing scams in 3 countries. Rachel Saturday beside me, squeezing my hand as Brandon's victims or unexpected sisterhood of survival stooped one by one to deliver their impact statements. Each woman told a familiar story of deception and betrayal. Each ended with the same note of triumph. We hadn't just gotten justice. We'd taken our power back. After the sentencing, Agent Morrison approached me with a knowing smile. The Bureau could use someone with your skills. Have you ever considered consulting for us? I thought about all the other Brandons out there, all the scammers who thought they were too clever to get caught. I smiled. You know what? I think I'd like that. The next mission? 6 months after Brandon's sentencing, I stood at a podium in a packed conference room at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Milwaukee. Behind me, a presentation detailed what was now called the Thompson case, though neither that name nor mine belonged to me anymore. I reclaimed my maiden name. I wanted no part of any of Brandon's aliases. The modern con artist doesn't use a gun, I told the room of agents and analysts. They use trust, manipulation, and technology, but they all leave a trail. You just have to know where to look. The program I developed with the FBI was already showing results. In just 1 month, 3 major Roman scam rings had been dismantled. Rachel had become one of our most valuable consultants, her experience helping us understand how these predators selected their targets. After the presentation, I checked my phone. A message from Susan. Another victim of Brandon's had been located, this time in Vancouver. Unlike the rest of us, she'd lost everything: her home, her savings, her business. But this time, we could help. The forensic team had finally cracked Brandon's encrypted files, uncovering offshore accounts he'd hidden around the world. The money he stole. Now, it was coming back to the women he had tried to ruin. I thought about that Sunday morning when I found his note, how he tried to break me with 5 cruel words. Instead, he'd given me something else entirely. A mission? A chance to help others fight back against men like him. The best revenge. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking Lake Michigan. The air was crisp, the city lights reflecting off the water. Brandon had spent his life taken from strong women. But in the end, he had created something powerful. A network of survivors turned warriors. Women who had once been victims now fighting back. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't just surviving. It's thriving,